Hi, everybody. We are here with another edition of Weather Wagers. We are moving into November now, and boy, do we have some exciting things to talk about. Brett Thackra, Dan Tomaso with you, although we are not with each other this week. This is an on-location podcast, and I will tell you, Dan is probably in the best spot that he could possibly be in here in early November. Dan, why don't you tell everybody where you're at this week?
Well, did I win a side bet? How did I end up here?
Maybe, yeah. Well, that would be a wonderful place. We see some palm trees in the background. For those of you watching, if you're listening, I can just set the scene for you. Dan is on a balcony with what looks like some tropical palm trees around. Dan, tell everybody where you're at.
So I'm in Orlando. I get to enjoy the week here with my in-laws family, and so this is my wife Brittany's family. We're here because we like Disney World, of course. We're also going to check out Universal. So far, we've hit up Magic Kingdom, we've done Hollywood Studios, and later today we're going to head out to Epcot. So oftentimes when a team wins the World Series, they say to the players, "What are you going to do next?" And they say, "Go to Disney World." I'm just happy the Phillies are in the World Series, so that's why I'm in Disney World.
You're getting out ahead of them. I think
That's right.
that's a good way to look at it, which makes me want to address some things. We may come back to the Disney World theme in a little bit, but we're happy to have you joining us this week
Happy to be here.
from location on the balcony. And man, do we have a lot to talk about. You could join us again wherever you get your podcasts. It's called Weather Wagers. We drop our new episodes on Wednesdays. You can get our full write-up at abc27.com, where we give you our more detailed thoughts on each of the games that we're picking over the week. And then, of course, wherever you get your podcasts, Apple, Spotify, Google, Amazon, right? And we are on YouTube, and Dan will be uploading this today. So join us, and you could get a sense of where Dan is. You could kind of set the scene. You can also email us, and Dan, we want folks to email us some side wager ideas, weatherwagers@gmail.com. We want to hear from you. We do have a side wager to pay off from last week. We're going to get into that. Dan, we'll do that when you get back into Pennsylvania. But you can find us online, meteorologist Brett Thackra, meteorologist Dan Tomaso on Facebook. I'm at Brett Thack, ABC27 on Twitter and Instagram.
And I'm at Doppler Dan on Twitter and Instagram. And if you've been following along with Brett and I on Twitter, you might have seen a lot of Phillies bomb reports late Tuesday night. As man, I'll tell you what, I've never been more excited for a podcast, just because, Brett, I can't believe the position we're in. We're more than halfway through the college football season. We're in the middle of the World Series with the Philadelphia Phillies involved in the World Series, and our Philadelphia Eagles are 7-0. 7-0.
We didn't plan to launch a podcast knowing that this is the type of year that we would be living through. But I will tell you, it's been fun. And I listen, we've developed quite a community online. We have a lot of fans that weigh in and tell us what they think. And that's why, too, we've set up, you can hit us up on any of those accounts to tell us what you think maybe another side wager should be, or maybe there's a specific game you want us to talk about. If you have a forecast question or just want to hear what we think, let us know. And again, our email, weatherwagers@gmail.com. That's easy. So before we get into all the fun, we do want to go back and review last week, because guess what? I have hope. I have hope again, because, Dan, you tanked. You stunk.
I'll tell you what, between college football and the NFL last week, first of all, I want to say, even though the Eagles are 7-0, this may be some of the worst football I've seen in the NFL in quite some time. And it's really starting to mess up the way I think about games. Week to week, you don't know what you're going to get. And I think in some ways, so too with college football, Brett. I think there's probably 5 or 6 teams. Now, last night, the first playoff standings came out, which is a made-for-TV event. I get it, but we all end up talking about it. I really think there's only 6 very good teams in college football right now. The rest are just kind of middling and trying to find their ground.
Yeah, and we're going to get into that as one of our topics here with our news and notes section of the pod coming up, because we actually do get to see what the committee thinks. And that's been fun. But, that Ohio State-Penn State game, it kind of played out like we thought. Penn State kept it close. And then, of course, Ohio State did get the cover off of Clifford's late interception. But Clifford not giving up. He came back and threw one more touchdown pass. So, actually, we ended up being wrong. Ohio State did not cover the 15.5. But, again, so frustrating as Penn State fans. You have them on the ropes for 3 quarters, and then everything falls apart in the fourth quarter. And I know you've mentioned the Brett Pry collapses and everything else, but Dan, this was the same old story. It doesn't seem to matter who the coordinators are. It does seem to matter perhaps who the quarterback is. And James Franklin cannot figure out how to put this team away.
Well, and I do think, again, it goes back to something we've talked about a lot on the podcast about talent at every position. And unfortunately, even though Penn State has upped their recruiting, Penn State has, figured out a way to upgrade some of their facilities. We were 10 years behind, maybe even farther behind Ohio State when James Franklin took over. And we're still trying to climb that mountain. And I get there's criticism about Franklin. I get there's criticism about his coordinators. But I want people to start being realistic here that you don't take down a giant very easily. And through 3/4 and maybe even 3/4 and a half, Penn State was toe to toe with them, which I'm quite proud of because I think the team that's coming in next year and the following year for Penn State is going to give them a run for their money. I truly believe that.
Well, I hope you're right because something has got to give it. Close only counts in hand grenades and horseshoes. And
Sure.
I hear you, and I don't necessarily disagree with you because I also think, look, how many teams really catch Alabama? It seems like almost a different team every year. And guess
Correct.
what? At the end of the year, Alabama's still there because,
Right.
like Ohio State, they're leaps and bounds above everybody else because they built that. They built it up to be that. What will be interesting is when Nick Saban retires, can they sustain it? Doesn't seem to matter at Ohio State who the coach is. They've been able to sustain it amongst many different coaches. Now, we'll get into that again a little later. We're going to come back on this. I see, again, our producer, Tisk Tisk, that would be me misspelled Tennessee on this graphic.
That's all right.
But guess what? I don't care because Tennessee won and they crushed your Kentucky Wildcats, and you lost this bet, which means
I did.
you're going next week when you're back, you're going to have to do the Will Levis. We're going to get some mayonnaise and put it in your coffee. You're drinking some coffee this morning. I was really surprised Kentucky didn't have a better showing.
Well, and so this goes back to another point about Penn State and the fan base. The fan base has been clamoring for, well, we lost Will Levis, and look at Will Levis having the season he's having with the Kentucky Wildcats. Well, friends, I think we also disproved that Will Levis is the next savior of the program because they did not look good at all against Tennessee, and the game was never really close.
They aren't known for their defense. So
no,
something was off there, and I agree. It was a shame. But that is a side wager you will pay up next week. Now, Michigan, remember, Vegas knows all. This we count just to avoid the tie because in real gambling, there is a tie or you get some money back if you push. Michigan pushed. They covered right at the 22. It was 29-7. That's how smart Vegas is. And then, of course, there was some theatrics after the game and the tunnel thing. And I understand Michigan State and Mel Tucker are to blame here. But, Dan, I got to tell you, another tunnel fight involving Michigan. Jim Harbaugh last week said James Franklin was the ringleader. Hey, Jim, that's twice in a row now that there's been some skirmishes in your tunnel. So, while I'm certainly not suggesting Michigan State be left off the hook here. In fact, there could be charges filed depending on the situation. I know Mel Tucker suspended some of these players. It's been interesting to follow, and I don't know the details, but boy, oh boy, I don't think Jim Harbaugh's a schoolboy, church boy here either.
No, I don't think so. And again, there's always a common denominator here. Who's really instigating these situations? Is it the opponent or is it the home team talking trash? I would tend to think it's the home team talking trash, but I could be wrong. And, either way, Michigan's having a darling season. Can they continue on this road? Because they don't have another test along the way. I mean, again, it's Michigan, Ohio State, and everybody else.
It certainly seems that way. We're going to lump the next three together to go through these quickly because, of course, we're going to talk about all of these coming up. So you and I went out on a limb. We picked the Phillies to cover the 1.5 runs, and again, just Vegas knows they won Game 1 6-5. They rallied. It was a lot of fun. The Astros did come back and win Game 2, so we were right with that pick. They split in Houston. Now they're back home. We're going to get into all of that. And then, Dan, the Eagles had no trouble with the Steelers. We didn't think that they would. But again, I just want to make a point here. We're going to talk more about the Eagles in a bit. It was just nice to see that this was a team the Eagles should have handled easily, and they did it. Never a doubt, wasn't stressed at all. How great is that to see?
It's exactly what you want. And I don't know if you've seen some of the stuff I've retweeted about the game, but the offensive line play for the Eagles is just pushing people around.
I
And,
wish Penn State had that.
it's all starting up front, my friend. And if they continue down this path, that is a winning recipe. It's not like they're winning with shot plays and, interceptions every game, because there was some thought leading into the bye week. Well, we're not sure the turnover ratio for the Eagles could withstand the season. They were getting so many turnovers, so many opportunities. Well, I think this past week proved that they're just a more physical team than most.
Well, and again, you need to be physical, but you also need to be good. Jalen Hurts coming into his own
Yes,
too, 4
wow.
touchdown passes, and A.J. Brown, you've mentioned him before. We're going to get into that too. Let me go through my picks, and then we'll head on over to you. TCU escapes. I thought it would be a close game, but they barely covered. They did. I think it was by 10 points, but I
think you're right.
I get the victory there. Oregon, no trouble on the road against Cal. I was happy to see that, but I am going to announce right now, I love Doug Peterson. I love Trevor. I'm now done with the Jaguars. They have screwed me too many times on our little pick'em here. I'm done with them. They did show up in London. The Broncos get a win, an important game for them. But, Dan, that's it for me and the Jaguars. I'm done with them.
Two very hapless teams played each other, and it was a little bit hard to watch at times between the Jaguars and the Broncos. I mean, you go from an Eagles fan watching the Eagles' high-flying offense to those two teams. It's and that's what I mean. NFL play right now, to me, across the league is down. I mean, the fact that the Commanders are 4-4 really kind of tells me something about where the league stands right now.
Well, yeah, but the NFC East is very good, and that's the one exception. And of course, we're in it, but luckily we're leading that as the Eagles continue their dominance so far. Now, here is where you really slipped up with your Doppler dandies. Not so dandy last week.
No, Oklahoma State. I mean, I still can't wrap my head around how bad they got blown out. I mean, literally blown out with a senior quarterback. Again, people think that the Penn State situation is so awful and so tenuous. What about Mike Gundy? Mike Gundy has done nothing to get this team into the playoffs to finish a season, even with all the talent they have. That was quite the shock to me. South Carolina, equally as shocking, at home, just fell apart. Shane Beamer was a hot commodity, and maybe they fed into some of that rat poison, as Nick Saban talks about. But they disappointed me, and the Bears just didn't show up. And, our little friend who normally sits next to us during our podcast, he's a big Cowboys fan. His Cowboys roll on against the Chicago Bears.
The great George Richards. We maybe need to get him involved and have him maybe do a pick of the week or something. But there it is. So you went an abysmal 2-7.
I did.
I wasn't great, but I posted a winning record. So look at this. How close are we? Our season record now stands at, and this is for those of you listening, Dan still has an edge, but not by much anymore. He is 47-42 on the season. I have moved up to 46-43. So I am only one game behind Dan now. Remember, the season record counts for our pie in the face bet at the end of the year, and I have really evened things up, or just about evened things up now. I feel a lot better, Dan, going into the second half of the season. Lots of football left to be played.
Well, and I'm telling you, my friend, I'm not playing prevent defense here. I'm playing up. I'm playing press coverage. I'm not letting easy third downs go by.
No, prevents nothing. So you got to stay aggressive, and I think we both will as we look forward. So let's chit-chat, Dan, if we can here now.
Sure.
About several different topics. And, I will say this. It has been a wonderful, wonderful stretch of months to be a Phillies, Eagles, and Penn State fan.
100%, my friend.
We're going to talk about this. We are recording this on Wednesday, if you're listening. So the Phillies have just come out and bombed their way to Game 4, which is tonight, and Aaron Nola is pitching. So, Dan, again, you are our baseball expert here, so to speak, although I follow it fairly closely myself. But I want to just take a moment, and I want to talk about where the Phillies stand so far in the World Series. So I'm going to fire some questions at you here. I've got about 5 or 6 questions, and I want you to answer them and kind of take off here. We go back to Houston. Let's talk about games 1 and 2. The odd part about this, and we're going to start there first, our two aces, Nola and Wheeler, have given up 9 runs.
Mm-hmm.
Excuse me, they've given up 10 runs, 9 of them earned. Neither had a great outing. the Phillies were still able to walk away with a split. But how surprising was it that Nola and Wheeler didn't have their best?
I guess I'm not totally surprised. I mean, they rode those guys pretty hard through the first three playoff series. It is a long season. And the thing you do have to watch for with Wheeler in particular is they brought him back from injury at a pretty aggressive pace back in September. And while he came out hot to start out in the playoffs, I mean, he was throwing 97, 98. I'm a little bit worried about arm fatigue. His velocity has dropped. Some of the folks I follow on Twitter have talked about that. So they're giving him as much rest as possible. And I think what's going to be interesting here, Brett, is obviously Nola pitches tonight. And hopefully they can ride the momentum here of what we saw last night against Lance McCullers, who was just serving him up on a tee last night. I mean, those pitches were center cut, frisbee sliders that were ending up as bombs in the stands for the Phillies. But I will be curious to see if they win tonight, do they send Wheeler back out on Thursday on quote unquote shorter rest?
I don't
I'm
think
not
so.
sure
I
they
mean,
do. As
Rob
much as I
Thompson
would like
said,
to, yeah, he said he
yeah,
will do it.
no, I don't think he's going to. He has a plan now, and that plan is to have him pitch in Game 6 if they need to go back to Houston.
But
I
boy,
think they just have to.
it would be tempting. It would be
It,
really tempting if they could finish it off at home.
It would be, but given what we saw last week, maybe the better option is to have the bullpen game. They will be going against Verlander,
Yes.
and he's had some issues in the World Series, so we'll see. Now I want to get back to the pitching though. The Phillies bullpen, who has been maligned,
Much maligned, yes.
rightfully so, but I mean they were better this year, but they still had issues. Dan, they've given up 0 runs of the World Series.
They have done a phenomenal job, and sometimes starters, there's more tape, there's more analytics on them, and then you bring in the next guy, and the next guy's blowing by 98, 99 in the case of Alvarado. And sometimes that change of look, change of pace from a guy like Aaron Nola is huge. I think that's part of it. But I also just think the other part of it is the bullpen compared to previous years is much deeper. And while there were mixed results at times during the season, I like the group of guys they have. Now, I think Houston has a better bullpen, and that's where you get into trouble. If you don't attack the starters like the Phillies did last night and you let Houston hang around in a close game, every guy coming out of that pen has elite stuff, it seems like. And you've seen a lot of swings and misses late in the game from the Phillies.
Yes, you have, and it is about building that lead. When they score first, they seem to hold on to it. When they don't score first, it's tough. Now, they did have the comeback in Game 1 that helped them, but you got to give a shout out to the bullpen. And the other thing is that rain postponement on Halloween.
Wow.
I think really benefited the Phillies because not only, Dan, did that mean that Ranger Suarez, who, I mean, how much do we love Ranger Suarez?
Ice water in his veins. He is the man.
You just want to have a beer with the guy. He just looks like a fun guy.
He looks jovial, looks like he's having fun, looks like he's enjoying himself. And by the way, he's not a hard thrower. He's like 92 to 95.
How great was his Game 3?
Unreal. I mean, and the way he fields his position, too, it's like nothing phases him.
No, it was so much fun to watch. He did what he had to do, but that benefited the Phillies because they were able to use the rain postponement. They were able to use him in Game 3.
Right.
And quite frankly, Dan, they didn't have to use their big bullpen guys.
They didn't. And they got some work for guys that still could play some pretty big roles here moving forward. I mean,
especially in Game 5.
Yeah, Connor Brogdon could be a big guy to watch, a big middle relief guy. Could you throw Kyle Gibson out of the pen? He looked sharp last night. As you know, I call him a wet noodle arm sometimes, but he looked sharp, and maybe it's the rest that helped with that. And then you couple it with a guy like David Robertson, who may not be in the highest, leverage situations. He didn't pitch last night, but he's rested too.
You've also called him a noodle arm, but he did well too. So
yes,
listen, you have to be happy with where things stand from a pitching standpoint. At
Indeed.
least right now, Wheeler is a question mark, but may not see him again. We'll see.
The key to this series, I think, is if the Phillies continue to keep their 1 through 4, Houston's 1 through 4 off the base pass, that you keep Altuve off, Pena off, their young shortstop.
Yep.
Alvarez has been in a slump. I hope Alvarez stays in a slump because he's their best overall hitter. And Bregman still has some holes in his swing. He had a wrist problem last year, and he hasn't been the same since. So I'm hoping he stays on the colder side, too. We can keep those guys off base. I'm pretty confident that our guys can get out the second half of their lineup.
So how do you see this series playing out? We're going to pick one of the games coming up, but do you think the Phillies can actually get this done at home, or are we going to have to go back to Houston and make it tight?
Well, I'd feel better if Nola and Wheeler were pitching here, but I do think the Phillies could steal another one here at home and probably win it in 6. I think they have to go back to Houston no matter what. I just can't see them beating this team 3 games in a row. Now, maybe just maybe Houston gets demoralized with another loss if Phillies come out and hit a bunch of home runs again tomorrow or tonight. But it's so hard to say. I mean, the other thing is we can't forget Houston's starting pitching between Christian Javier, who's going tonight, Framber Valdez. We've already seen Verlander. I mean, they still have some horses yet to go themselves.
I agree. As much as we want this to be the team of destiny and having basically Philly go crazy Thursday night, it would be a storybook ending. They have not lost at home. This is still the best team in the major leagues, and
yes,
I think they are going to have to go back to Houston. I hate to say it. I don't know, but having said all of that, there is still something magical about Citizens Bank. These guys play better at home. Look at the home runs last night.
Yeah.
It's just, Dan, I'm telling you, there is something about it.
I was explaining to my family here that, some guys are able to feed off the crowd and feed off the energy. This time of the year, the stars come to play, and the guys that respond are the true stars, like a Bryce Harper. I mean, first pitch he sees.
Boom.
I mean, it was a no doubt about it. It wasn't a Citizens Bank home run. Some of these guys just are wired that way. It's hard to explain. I mean, Reggie Jackson was the same way. Reggie Jackson didn't have phenomenal numbers in the regular season, but he showed up every October.
Yes, he did. And that's when you need your, Bryce Harper. I mean, most likely he's going to be a future Hall of Famer. I mean,
can you believe all the home runs in this postseason? 17.
It's been incredible.
From a team that seemed like at times they were in home run droughts. It's pretty incredible to me.
Yep. Let's keep it going. It's so much fun. And that's the other thing. This is a team that is fun to watch. And when you have, and by the way, we loved all of our boys from 08, the Howards and Chase Utley. And I think there will be some people that say he should be in the Hall of Fame. And, all of those guys and the pitchers, your Lees, your Hallidays, all of them. I mean, they are stars. But this group, I mean, we have the guy on our team in Bryce Harper. And again, there's something really, really special and fun that these guys are playing as a team, and then they're doing it for Topper. 2 more
Topper
to go.
Is unreal. Two
more to go.
I love that. I almost tweeted again last night. I'm trying not to be so obnoxious on Twitter because I don't want the tides to turn on me. But I will say another thing, too. Bryce Harper, from a national standpoint, when he signed with Philadelphia, was almost not totally an afterthought, but his first 2 seasons weren't his strongest with Philly. But last year, obviously, an MVP. This year, I think he probably would have been in the MVP race again had it not been for the wrist issue. But he is right back on the national stage as one of the best players in baseball. And how many times, Brett, in our lifetime have we been able to say the Phillies have one of the best players in Major League Baseball? It's been super rare.
It's been a while, and as much as we want to talk about the Astros pitching, I think we have one of the best lineups in baseball. Truly,
yes.
From 1 to 9, you've got Stott in there now. Even Marsh again contributed. I know he's not known for his bat, but he's been able to hit some dingers this postseason. Dan, I love the lineup. I mean, I really do. So that let me ask you this, because we have some other things to focus on. But in wrapping up the Phillies part of this, where do they go from here? What are you hearing about looking ahead? You have to finish this out. We want the World Series, but can this team be a team like a Houston or like an Atlanta, where you're there every year and you at least have a shot? Can we go to the World Series or at least be in the playoffs for the next 5 or 6 years? What are your thoughts on that? And is the team willing to spend and maybe get another ace in their pitching rotation? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think that's the key, that last part of getting another ace, getting another stud as your third option. Now, again, Ranger Suarez is kind of morphing into that role, so maybe you need more of a fourth guy. Maybe you don't need that elite status. But I think what this hopefully proved to Phillies ownership, and it's something I've been saying for years, you're one of the largest market teams in the country.
Spend.
spend, act like it, and look what happens when you do spend. Now they're slightly over the luxury tax for this year, but they have a lot coming off the books here this year coming up. So Gene Segura probably will not be back. I know he's a favorite, a fan favorite, but I think his options somewhere in the neighborhood of 15 million, which is too much for the type of player he is
Gosh,
right
I'd
now.
love
Now
to see him finish this out then.
I would love to too. Now maybe they bring him back on a smaller deal. That's always a possibility. But there have been rumors circulating that Trey Turner of the Dodgers, their shortstop, is interested in coming back to the East Coast. Now, you may say, well, we have a shortstop. We have a shortstop of the future, Bryson Stott. But if Gene Segura moves on, you slide Stott to second, you move Trey Turner into short, and all of a sudden you're up the middle. Looks pretty good with Marsh, Turner, and Stott up the middle, and of course JT behind the plate. I think that's probably the only move if they were to make a large splash that would make sense on their end. But there's rumors of Shohei Ohtani wanting to be out of LA. Could he move to the East Coast in some way, shape, or form? Is there another outfielder type that we could get Schwarber off his feet or Castellanos off his feet and bring him in? And then I think the other key thing of this offseason, Brett,
I'm
and
not
something
sure we
to
want
watch.
Castellanos off his feet.
I know.
He's been terrific.
I know, but I almost think he is more of a DH type. And I think he would do better just in that role. But I think the thing to watch is, does Harper get the surgery and get out of this issue of not being able to throw in the outfield? I mean, I'm assuming he's heading for Tommy John surgery of some type with his blown out elbow. So that's something to watch. And then if he doesn't play right field, does he move to first base? I think that's a huge question.
What about Reese?
Or, yeah, what happens to Reese then in that equation? Does Reese get moved on for some prospects, some younger guys? I think all of that is on the table. I think it's going to be a very interesting offseason because the core is there now, and that's the important part. You have some young guys, you have some veteran guys, and then you just need to figure out the pieces around it. Right.
Can the Phillies be a postseason threat every year? That's my question.
I think so, especially now with this format, because I'm not as worried. What I was worried about the previous years is the Mets spending all this money and Atlanta being Atlanta. But with 3 teams possibly getting in every year from the NL East, that gives the Phillies a roadmap.
Yeah, but I guess what I'm saying is, can the Phillies be one of those teams that win 100 games?
I think so. Now, again, they can't start with a lousy April and a lousy May, because without those 2 months this year, they were one of the best teams in baseball.
But I would also argue we have the manager in place now.
Yes, I think so too, because for whatever reason, his low pulse, his, calm demeanor, it seems to work with the veterans of the group. And for the most part too, it seems to be working with the younger guys too.
Oh yeah. I think it's a very happy bunch right now. Let's finish it out, and then we can worry about next year. But it is fun to look ahead. It would be nice to be one of these teams that's there every year, wouldn't it?
Oh, to go on a run again,
Yep.
08, 09 into the early 2010s. I mean, that would be wonderful.
Let's do it.
That's what ownership wants, by the way. They want sustained success. I mean, it's not like they're going for it one year and not the next.
What does sustained success bring in?
Money.
And also, I would argue too, guys like a Trey Turner or some of these other folks, they're looking at this and who wouldn't want to play there?
Correct.
Look at how exciting it is.
Yeah, and you have a star now in Bryce Harper, which is apparently why Trey Turner wants to come. He likes playing with Bryce Harper.
So, yeah, I think it's just success breeds success. And I hope this is the start of something, but you got to finish it. So let's get the win here and maybe end it in Philly, or if we have to go to Houston, we will. But we got to finish it up. All right, we're gonna. I don't want to say skim over the next couple of things, but how can we not talk about the Phillies? I mean, they're just, this is what we've waited our whole lives for. So
exactly,
we're gonna talk about it. Quick Eagles preview. They come in, they do what they need to do with the Steelers. They play on a short week here. We are going to pick that game coming up. But, Dan, how long can this team remain undefeated?
Well, the NFL is so different than college football. They don't need to be undefeated. I mean, that's the big thing. Some of these AFC games, and whether it was last Sunday against the Steelers or if it's the Texans, if it's the Titans, they don't actually need to win some of these games. And I think the question becomes, how hard do you keep pushing these guys? Because it's a long season, and then you still have to get through the playoffs. So there's definitely a balancing act that has to happen. And as well as I do, one of these games, things are going to go wrong. It happens. The ball bounces the wrong way.
Yep, I said that in the column. You just it's hard to go undefeated. You don't need to go undefeated. And one would have to think somebody's going to catch them on an off day. Maybe it's this week. And I know everybody's thinking, my goodness, not against the Texans. It probably not. It worries me. It worries me on a short week. And they may be distracted by the Phillies too. I hate to say it. I know it's two totally different things, but you just never know. You never know what's going to happen.
Right. And so, I think whether it's the Titans, whether it could be one of our divisional teams, because division games are always tough, I think they end up with 2 or 3 losses, and I'm fine with that. I'm fine with that. I want to see how they do as the season goes on and in the playoffs. I don't really care as much about the regular. I mean, I hate to say that, but the regular season is kind of just your conduit to get to the playoffs.
Look at the Phillies. I mean, again,
right.
That's where you need to perform. Now, again, the schedule coming up Thursday night. They are in Houston taking on the Texans. Then the Commanders on the 14th of November, followed by the Colts, and then the Packers. So again, it's not a brutal schedule. I'm looking at they get the Packers at home. The Titans come to Philadelphia, but again, that game, as tricky as that is, that's at home. They get some of their trickier games. There's no tough game until they get into the Giants and the Cowboys again, really. That I'm scared of. The only other they play the Bears, they play the Saints. I mean, this schedule, Dan, I'm sorry. Again, other than the Giants and the Cowboys, this schedule is favorable. Yeah, maybe they drop a game or two, but I mean, come on. They're not, I mean, they are a good football team.
They are a very good football team. I'm very happy with the progression we've seen from the offense under Shane Steichen and Nick Sirianni. I mean, it's in a total about face from the first handful of games last year. It's dynamic. It's fun to watch. You don't know what's coming next. It's, sometimes under Andy Reid, you kind of felt, well, here comes the screenplay. Here comes the tight end play. I really feel like they're unpredictable, and they have so many weapons right now. A.J. Brown is just a man amongst boys. Devontae Smith isn't even involved very much, and he's the fastest guy on the team.
Hurts is throwing dimes.
I know.
And how about the play calling seems to be right there. Sirianni.
That's what I mean. It's a good tempo.
It's a good tempo. You're right. And then you've got, again, the running game.
Miles Sanders has been unreal. I mean, he hits the hole and hits it hard. And, when he needs a spell, there's Boston Scott that they use a lot in goal line packages because he's small and he gets in tight windows, and Gainwell too. I mean, they have guys they're not really even utilizing every game. And Dallas Goedert is one of the best players in the NFL after the catch.
You talk about physical. He's just going to blow you over. We're going to pick the game coming up, but in our last news and notes, we actually, you and I don't want to say this is a college football podcast. We promised you it was going to be about many different sports, probably with a focus on college football, and all of a sudden that's buried here toward the end of our discussion. But again, we're going to talk about the Phillies. The Eagles are undefeated. Hello, we don't get to say that often, so we're gonna relish it. Quick thought on Penn State. Trapped this weekend going to Indiana after an emotional loss to Ohio State. They tend to do that.
They tend to, but I think the score, if you're a casual fan and you're just looking at scores and you're looking at stats, Penn State was in that game. And I think it's unfortunate what happened at the end for sure. And quite honestly, and I will say this proudly, that I'm not that enamored with Ohio State's defense. It was one guy. It was one wrecking ball in the defense that was a problem. I think there's too much talent. I mean, we saw the talent. We saw the play calling. We saw what we expected against Ohio State to keep them in the game. I don't think Indiana can keep up, even if it is a Drew Aller, Sean Clifford split, which that could be the case now moving forward. I'm not sure that's exactly the right call, but I understand why people are asking for it.
Yeah, I'm not so sure Franklin's going to do it. I think it may be the Sean Clifford show.
I think so. And, I agree with that because, again, it's all about recruiting, right? And if you show loyalty to players, that is important to recruits and to their families. And
but you know what else is important? Playing a 5-star.
Well, sure. I get that, but he might not be ready. I mean, we're not there every day to see the ins and outs of practice. I mean, that is a young guy that's going to be thrust into duty in a season where you could be in a New Year's Six game. I mean, that is still very much on the table for them moving ahead.
Yeah, winning 10 games is better than winning 8. So, I mean, but we'll see. It could be a trap this week as they go on the road after an emotional loss. But
I will say this much. if the offensive line plays the way they did on the left-hand side, I mean, there were holes against Ohio State. That was the
Oh,
best I've
we
seen the running game in a while
we
against a good
ran
team.
the ball. Yep,
And if we do that
100%.
against Indiana, I hope that kind of eliminates any unforced errors.
What are some games that are intriguing to you this week on the college football slate?
Well, if Tennessee is truly the best team in the land, as people seem to think right now, what's bigger than Tennessee, Georgia? I mean, you have the reigning national champions
Wow, big game.
playing against the Tennessee Hot Vols out of Knoxville, Tennessee. So there's something
Number
very
one in the
interesting.
country, by the way.
Yes, number one in the country. Alabama LSU, I think, is very sneaky because I think Brian Kelly has them playing well, and this is the first time Brian Kelly gets to face off against Saban in a non-Notre Dame uniform, which I think is a big deal. So I'm very curious to see how that goes. And then there's some Big 12 action as well. The Big 10, I think, unfortunately, now, other than the West, things are pretty determined until we get to the very end. So there's not as much intrigue there.
No, it's a pretty quiet November. It's always an October to remember and a November sort of to forget, at least two when it comes to Penn State. So let's talk about the college football playoff picture heading into November. The first rankings released last night. You have Tennessee, Ohio State ahead of Georgia, and then Georgia, Clemson getting the number 4 spot.
Yes.
Michigan then at number 5. They cited the non-conference schedule for the Wolverines as part of the reason why they were low. And quite frankly, I buy it. I mean,
I
it was a
agree.
joke.
It was a total joke. Again, he had how many games to figure out his quarterback? That shouldn't be happening in the season. Shouldn't be happening.
What does it tell you, too, that Penn State, by the committee, is ranked number 15, even after 2 losses?
I think they saw what we saw, honestly. I saw a team that went toe-to-toe with one of the best in the country until the bitter end almost.
Yeah, it's just it is a fun time of year to see how these games are going to shake out.
Do you think Tennessee's the best team in the land?
I do. And I think you had to slot them there because Georgia has struggled.
Yeah.
There was a couple of weeks where they struggled. Michigan looks good, but their quality of opponents, I mean, we were their only good team that they beat. Ohio State struggled when they were tested with us on the road. Tennessee has been dominating teams. They have the best win in the country over Alabama. So, again, I think you have to give it to them. Now, it's going to get worked out this week. That's the other thing. They've got to go into Georgia. They're going to be hungry. But if Tennessee's defense shows up like it did against Kentucky, the Dogs better watch out.
Yes, I totally agree. I think the SEC probably has the most intrigue of all right now, and I think it's going to be fun.
I think that Alabama LSU game is intriguing because, again, Nick has to go on the road. Guess what? Hasn't played well on the road this year.
No, and I think LSU's pretty darn good, and they're well coached, as we knew they would be with Brian Kelly.
Well, and this is where, too, I think, okay, people tend to write Penn State off because we have 2 losses. LSU has 2 losses.
Right.
And you know what? Those things happen. It doesn't mean you're a bad football team.
Well, and I want, for all the people that complain about Penn State, I want to say this again. How many teams are actually close with Michigan and Ohio State? Not many.
No, not many, at least in our league. And quite frankly, like you said, there's only about 5 or 6 teams that are in that elite group. And unfortunately, we're right in their own division recruiting against them. It is tough. Not to make excuses, but again, that is all part of this. All right. We don't have our special sound effects this week because you're not here. You're on the road, but that's okay. I will say it. It is now time for our games of the week. And Dan, one of the things that we're going to do here is start by picking a Wednesday and a Thursday game. And we know that the Astros and the Phillies are tonight. Aaron Nola takes them out. And how about this? The Phillies, now these odds are by Caesars Sportsbook, valid today, Wednesday, November 2nd. If you're listening a little later, these odds, of course, are bound to change a little bit heading into the weekend. But the Phillies are minus 140 now to win the series. How big is that?
I did not see this coming. I mean, I really thought the Astros were the favorites. I had my doubts coming into this that they'd be able to prevail over the Astros' great pitching. But I think the sports books are seeing what we're seeing, how the Phillies play at home and what an advantage that is. I mean, it almost did play into the Phillies' hands in some ways that they won game 1. Now they're at home. I think that's where this is coming from, that they could finish at home or take it to Houston and only have to win 1 down there.
We certainly hope they can, and you just got to keep the momentum rolling tonight. Let's do it, fellas. Eagles Texans then Thursday. It's a game that not many people should care about, and I know some Philly fans were freaking out because now the Phillies go up against the Eagles. Listen, if you're a Philadelphia sports fan, who cares about the Eagles Thursday
Yeah,
night?
this
The,
is a
the
garbage game.
the Phillies hopefully might have a chance to clinch it. And it's a garbage game. It's on Prime. I mean, I love Al Michaels, but no one's going to be paying attention to this game, and nor
I
should
might
they.
watch the game cast from time to time just to see what's
Sure.
going
And
on.
if you have two screens, yeah, it's going to be up on the second screen, but this is not a crisis because they're playing against the Phillies. The Phillies deserve our attention right now. The Eagles should probably win this game going away. Okay, now the next three games are college games, and there's not a lot of great pro games this week. So that's why I threw the Eagles up there thinking, let's pick against the spread. Maybe they get trapped. Again, I try to pick, and we both do, games of the week where the weather is a factor. We're going to be going to the Big 12 this week, but we started with an SEC matchup. Again, folks, Jimbo Fisher's paid more than James Franklin. Not a lot more, but he is paid more. Is that oil money worth it right now?
No, and not only is he paid more, their players are paid more through the NIL than anybody on Penn State is too. And see, Brett, I think again, I've been a big opponent to NIL. I think Texas A&M is exactly the reason why you got to be careful paying these guys.
Well, you want to elaborate on that?
I just think they're not a team. They play for themselves. I mean, it's pretty clear they're not cohesive. And I just feel like when the expectations are put so high up because you're paying players, when it falls short, it goes ugly real fast.
It's ugly. I mean, the 12th man may not even show up, and they're known for that. Florida coming to town, another team that has struggled, but they get forgiven a bit. Billy Napier's in his first year there.
Right,
And
correct.
they haven't been anything to write home about anyway, but it's just an intriguing game. If two Big Ten teams were 1-4 in conference playing each other, people would joke about it and not care. This gets a noon kick on ESPN. I'm laughing at this. It's a joke of a game. Nobody should care about it, but we're going to pick it to see which one ends up at the bottom
I'm
of the swamp.
I'm actually surprised Texas A&M is favored based on the way they've played.
Yeah, and we'll talk about that when we pick it. But I would agree. It is a bit surprising. But again, I think it comes down to they do have the better talent. Can they show up with pride and play in front of, a couple of people that may show up to that? And then we get into the Big 12. This is where we want to talk about the weather. Oklahoma State, which absolutely messed the bed last week against Kansas, who was at home the last time they played 2 weeks ago against Baylor. Oklahoma State is favored. I understand why they are, but boy, oh boy, they better figure it out this week at practice because, Dan, that was an embarrassment.
It was an embarrassment, and I'm not sure how you come back from it. You mentioned Penn State trying to come back from their loss. I think it's even worse in
Again,
Cowpoke land.
yeah, we have never been embarrassed. Now the Michigan loss was close, but again, we did score. We played tough for the first half. It's been a while since we've been embarrassed. That was embarrassing. And then Texas at Kansas State, two teams that were picked potentially to win the Big 12 this year. They still have a shot. Neither one is out of it. Kansas State is the team that destroyed Oklahoma State last week. Again, they play at home. Texas still trying to figure things out. Texas is favored in this game.
Yeah, Texas very much so trying to figure things out, and I think Mr. Sarkisian could be in the same spot Jimbo Fisher is if they don't find a way to win this game.
They have to. So let's talk about the forecast because, again, one of the main things right now, Dan, is the Big 12. And that's what we're going to focus on. The Phillies are not going to have any concern with their forecast in Philadelphia the next two nights. The Eagles certainly aren't as they play in a dome in Houston. But I am concerned on Saturday for the Big 12 matchups. Let's take us through here. There's a front going across the country right now that could have an impact.
Yeah, so this front hopefully will steer off to the east. Some of the more recent model guidance takes this east of, say, Kansas, Oklahoma, Texas by the time we get into Saturday morning. Right, by Saturday.
So
but
that's an updated forecast.
notice it still is hanging close by. So again, as we say in this business, the timing is everything when it comes to rain and showers and storms. That's one forecast model. I'm going to back
up here. I do like that though, because that would mean that we picked these games a couple of days ago. It looked wet. Maybe that means we're going to be in the clear. Maybe we should have picked some other games.
Well, but this Canadian model, so that was the American model. The Canadian model is slower. So again, it's still something to keep an eye on. I want to continue to watch how that progresses. It seems to be trending in the right direction, but maybe Saturday during the day, some of the Big Ten games over the Great Lakes we'll need to watch out for, and possibly even into Sunday NFL action into New England and some of the Mid Atlantic we'll have to watch. Of course, it doesn't affect the Eagles this week playing on Thursday, but that front could be problematic for those areas.
Yeah, the Great Lakes up into New England, and of course a bit of a breeze, but maybe the Big 12 escapes the rain that we had originally thought perhaps could affect them on Saturday. That does look to be more in the uh, Arkansas, LSU, Illinois, Indiana
Right.
region than
Correct.
the Big 12. All right, let's move on and give our picks here for these games. Dan, I think we both feel the Phillies can win tonight if Nola shows up and has his stuff. He feeds off the crowd. Can we make it 2 in a row? We both think that we can.
I think we can. I think we can. I think Houston might be on their heels a little bit. It's exactly where the Phillies want them to be. And again, the bats are hot again. They kind of woke up in the second half of the game. In game 2, it wasn't the prettiest offensive output, but you could tell they were still in the game. They weren't totally shut down. Whereas last night, Houston was totally shut down. They had very few opportunities to score. I picked the Phillies to win.
Me too. And again, the over/under now. It was 3.5 for game 3. Guess what it is tonight? 7.5.
Wow.
I'm not even going to touch that. But yeah,
Holy cow.
Keep setting that over/under low, and we will see what happens tonight. And again, I'm not picking money line here. It's tough. Let me just. I want to look that up. And again, we're using Caesars here, just out of curiosity. I think it would probably be Houston that is favored here by 1.5, which is a typical baseball spread.
Yeah, I would assume so.
But given the fact, though, that the Phillies are favored now to win the series, that's pretty impressive. Yeah, Houston minus 1.5 tonight, but the Phillies minus 140 overall. We're just going to pick the Phillies to win, try to get that third game with Nola on the mound. And then we're both picking the Eagles, not a surprise there, by the 14. It is a big number. It's a short week, but I just, again, why would you pick against them at this point?
Here's a little prop bet for you. Do you think Gardner Minshew sees another quarter or even longer here in this game?
I think probably by quarter 4 he's in there.
It's unreal. I mean, how many NFL teams have the luxury of pulling their quarterback in the middle of a game?
Not a lot, but again, if you're smart and you get to that point, you might as well do it, right?
Yep. And I think, again, offensive line play is huge right now. They keep those guys healthy. They should march on in Houston fairly easily.
I agree. Let's get to the Big 12 picks, and we do have that SEC game, though, to start us out. I am going to pick Jimbo Fisher to cover this and say
baby.
They show up, they have pride, they're going to get the job done. I know it's looked abysmal, but they're back at home. They're playing at home for the first time since late September. I think they show up. I think they get the win here. I don't think Florida's that good. I still think Texas A&M has some big boys on their defense. I think Jimbo gets it done at home.
I wish I could say the same thing. Texas A&M has had a lot of trouble scoring. They seem to have a quarterback problem. Florida, on the other hand, does not have a quarterback problem. They have a man by the name of Anthony Richardson who has been unreal this year, kind of a one-man wrecking ball for Florida. I think Billy Napier gets a big win here on the road. I think Jimbo Fisher is in big trouble, and I think part of this stems to discipline, Brett. You know, one thing that you never hear about with James Franklin is discipline issues, that his team is reckless. Jimbo Fisher, on the other hand, has had some issues both with Florida State, and now here in Texas A&M. I mean, there were reports of some of his players smoking pot in the locker room in the middle of a game. I mean, what does that tell you about what's going on there? I mean, it seems like it's no
Jimbo
rules,
Fisher,
do whatever you want to do.
Yeah, is losing control. That's what it tells me. But I will say this: if he does lose this game, and you're right, and I'm wrong, put him out to the curb with the Christmas tree.
I mean, could you imagine being that donor coughing up that amount of money to get rid of a coach? I would be sick.
Well, yeah, but when you have it, it's chump change. So
I guess
it's all oil money. And guess what? The last I checked, the oil companies are doing just fine.
They're doing quite well.
Yeah, so they have the money, at least according to my receipt from the gas pump this morning. They will be fine. Oklahoma State at Kansas. Now, Dan, I have to say, sometimes we handcuff ourselves here a little bit on weather wagers, and what I mean by that is this. If you are a really savvy bettor, you could have gotten this over-under at 69 when this first came out on Monday,
That's
late
huge.
in the weekend on Monday. I totally was on the under for a couple of reasons. Oklahoma State's offense didn't show up. I just don't. It was such a big number, and I thought, you know what, at the time too, it looked like there could be some rain. Well, guess what? We give you the odds the way that they stand on Wednesdays as of when we record this. The odds drop now 65.5, and as you just showed us, the forecast has changed enough that this game could be completely dry. Makes me a little nervous here, but typically in a game like this where a lot of times you think it's going to be a shootout, it typically goes a bit under. I'm still going to stick with that. I don't know who's going to win this game, but I will still stick with the under. I'm a little more nervous of it. I would have loved to have gotten that number at 69 today. It's 65.5. I'll take it.
Yeah, I think this could end up being more of a shootout, but 65 is still a pretty large number for two pretty good teams. I would have said coming into this, if Oklahoma State won last week, we could say almost an elite team with Oklahoma State. But as James Franklin likes to say, we're a great team. We're not an elite team. And that's where Mike Gundy stands right now with his Cowboys. I'm picking Kansas, though, at home. I'm surprised it's that small of a line, actually. But I think the Jayhawks are having an inspired season. I think Lance Leipold could stay there. That would be a shocker if he does, but I think he could if they have a decent season. He likes building up programs. Let's just not forget about the Jayhawks and how they've started this year.
100%. And then finally, Texas at Kansas State. Not much to say here. We think Kansas State will handle this at home. Adrian Martinez looks great. I like what Chris Kleiman is building. And as you said, Steve Sarkisian just doesn't have it quite figured out yet.
Yeah, every time we keep thinking Texas might be back, I mean, the media loves saying Texas is back. We haven't seen it yet, and I'm still not sure. I mean, they seem to have a quarterback in Quinn Ewers, but
and
other
a running
than that,
back, Bijan Robinson.
Yes, other than that, though, I haven't seen great wide receiver play. Obviously, their defense is shaky. There was a stat, and I don't know it off the top of my head, of how many games Sark has blown with leads. They're a terrible second half team. It's kind of confounding, and I think that could bite them again.
Well, I think, you go into the Little Apple, Bill Snyder Family Stadium. That is a tough place to play. Kansas State gets it done. They cover the 2.5. We both like it. Now it's time to head to our under the radar game, which happens to be this week, App State at Coastal Carolina. Once again, if you're not a college football fan or you're just a casual fan, I think these games kind of slip under the radar, these fun Sun Belt games. You've got App State. Everybody knows App State. They're not a program that's necessarily under the radar, especially with game day going there this year. But, again, what a fun Sun Belt matchup.
Yeah, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, despite the fact, Dan, that Coastal Carolina is leading, they have two divisions in the Sun Belt, Group A and Group B. These two are both in Group A. Coastal Carolina is leading. They only have one loss, but App State is favored.
Yeah, I think App State's the better team here. They've shown they can beat high-level competition. Now, that being said, they kind of did a nosedive after some of their early success in September. So I will be curious to see if the Chanticleers at home can maintain that lead.
Can we go back to the forecast board just a second?
Sure.
I want to check the forecast. I think we usually do this for the end of the radar game. I don't really suspect there's going to be many issues Thursday night in Conway, South Carolina.
Yep, I'm backing up here.
It should be a nice evening. Pleasant there along the East Coast, and I'm going to give you my thoughts on this game real quick. Let's get back to
right here, and it looks good.
Yep, I think it looks dry, right? So excellent. Let's go to the pick board. This is what it comes down to me: the teal turf, baby. I'm taking the Chanticleers. They're going to stay undefeated, or I should say, stay with the one loss. They may be undefeated in Sun Belt play. They're going to stay atop Group A, the division there. Give me Coastal +3.
Give me the talent of Appalachian State. They always seem to rise to the occasion. They are a thorn in many teams' sides, including their own conference. Appalachian State to cover at -3 for me.
Perfect. All right, let me give you my rundown of my best bets here. This week, we're going UMass at UConn, two programs historically that are terrible. But I got to tell you, Jim Mora Jr., UConn is sitting at 4-5. Dan, wouldn't it be wild if UConn goes to a bowl game and Texas A&M doesn't?
If they are playoff bound, that would be he probably would get mentioned for Coach of the Year because
you mean bowl bound. They're not going to the playoff.
Sorry, yes, bowl bound, yes.
Yeah.
As they say, postseason bound, I guess I should say. I mean, UConn has been kind of the doormat of college football. There were some thoughts to do they drop down again to D2. I don't think that will be a conversation anymore if they continue to play well and recruit. And don't forget, they had a Penn State cast off there at the beginning of the season. And I think UConn could certainly continue through the transfer portal. I mean, there are a lot of guys sitting out there that think the transfer portal is going to be their pathway to success. Why wouldn't you play for a guy that was a coach in the NFL? Why wouldn't you want to play in the Northeast? So, Robeson, the former quarterback, the maligned quarterback for Penn State, is now there at UConn. Could that be another pathway for other players?
Well, yeah, he's definitely building something. I mean, to have this kind of minor success even at UConn right now is phenomenal. They're favored by 15.5, by the way. And then we go to Ohio State at Northwestern. Listen, Ohio State, they certainly were not embarrassed, but they were challenged at Penn State.
100%.
They're number 2. I think this is a team, though, that's a perfect time. Yes, they have to go on the road. It's sleepy in Evanston, Illinois at noontime, but I don't think they're going to have any problem here. This is a get-right game for them. They're going to prove why they're number 2 in the country against the Big Ten's worst in Northwestern. Dan, I don't think you really should have anything to disagree with me about there.
I think this game's over at half. I think you could see a lot of the number 2s and 3s playing in the second half. I really do.
Yep. And then Iowa at Purdue. That is a noon kick. Purdue favored by 4.5 here. Iowa always tends to make these things interesting, but I think Purdue just is better offensively. Certainly anybody is better. I mean, there are some high school teams that are better offensively than Iowa. Iowa's defense could keep this interesting, but I got to tell you, boiler up on this one, Jeff Brom all the way. Of course, we'll show you our official picks coming up in a minute. Your games this week, you always, and I love this because we don't really reveal our games until we hit the air here. You've picked some good ones. You picked the 2 big ones of the SEC, but you start in the ACC.
I start in the ACC because if you think Penn State fans are restless, a lot of Pitt fans are restless with Narduzzi and the year they're having with Keaton Slovis, who was a transfer originally from USC as quarterback for Pitt. And a lot of people are saying similar things that they say about James Franklin. Was the success under Narduzzi the last couple of years just because a once-of-a-lifetime quarterback in Kenny Pickett? It may well be, but Syracuse, on the other hand, now is a 2-loss team and needs this win to stay relevant. So again, we go back to the 2 losses, how important that is. And Pitt is favored in this game, even though to me they have not looked good the last couple of weeks. So that's an interesting one to follow. You'll see my pick in just a few moments. Tennessee and Georgia. I mean, I think this one could be for all the marbles here moving ahead, just because it really could set up either team to propel them forward, or it could be a huge setback for either one of them. Tennessee's having a storied season so far. Can they keep up the momentum on the road? I think it's a really, really tough test for Hendon Hooker and Mr. Josh Heupel. And then finally, we mentioned it a little bit earlier, but Alabama, LSU. Alabama's looked vulnerable this year. LSU's kind of an up-and-comer, maybe not as much talent as Alabama, but they're well coached. This could be a game, and this could be an annual ritual now between Brian Kelly and Nick Saban for the next 5 or so years. What does this game look like? I'm very curious.
And Dan, you know what's interesting about those 2 games? Right here, the Tennessee-Georgia winner takes control in the East.
Yes, they do.
And the Alabama-LSU winner takes control in the West. And you might be saying, well, how does LSU take control? Because listen, Alabama would then have 2 losses in conference. Yep. LSU, one of their losses was the opener to Florida State.
Correct.
So they would be in the driver's seat in the West. And boy, oh boy, wouldn't that have the college football world buzzing.
It certainly would.
Show Monday would be off the rails if that would happen. But I think it's possible because of how Alabama has played on the road. So let's show you what we have got. It is time for our final picks. And here we go. We're picking the Phillies to win tonight. We're picking the Eagles to cover Thursday night. Dan, we differ here, and we explain why on Texas A&M Florida. I'm still going to take the under on the Oklahoma State-Kansas game.
Okay.
You're going to take the Jayhawks, and then I'm going to we're both picking Kansas State, and then here we go. I like Coastal. You like App State. That's a difference. I am picking all the favorites here. I'm rolling with the and they're all no, Ohio State's on the road, but I'm rolling with all the favorites. Give me the UConn 15.5. It's a risk, but UMass stinks. Northwestern stinks. Give me Ohio State and Purdue against Brian Ferentz's offense. And I think Jeff Brom, he's still fighting for the West. The Big Ten West is open. I like what Purdue can do here.
And we know Purdue's a good team. We know that. We've seen it. They have a similar to the Clifford situation. They have a very good veteran quarterback. I think this is a chance for him to cement his legacy. I think all that matters in college football. I really do. When it comes down to legacy, how long you've been with a program, I like your pick about Purdue there. Now, on my flip side of things, I like Syracuse to come into Pitt. Somehow they're the underdogs, but I think they are the better team here. We've seen this Dino Babers bunch play very well at times this year,
Are
including
they getting
against.
a bit
Go ahead.
demoralized, though, after 2 back-to-back losses?
They could be, but I think Pitt could be the right team to face here and get kind of right the ship. I mean, again, we think highly of Purdue, and Syracuse early in the season knocked them off.
True.
So I think
point.
I think Syracuse, obviously they lost a tough game to Clemson, but Syracuse seems to have enough talent. Finally, we go to Georgia and Tennessee. I'm picking Georgia to still have enough talent to pull off the win against a high-flying group in Tennessee. Again, if this were flipped, if Georgia was going to Tennessee, I may feel different. Right. I may feel different about it, but I think the Dogs get it done. And then I pick LSU to cover. They may not win, but 13.5 points seems like a lot against a not so hot Alabama team.
Yeah, and by the way, you're not just picking Georgia to win. You actually do think they're going to cover the 8 points.
I do. I think Georgia's going to cover. I think that's a small enough line that they cover.
It's an interesting take, but I don't necessarily disagree. Keep an eye on that LSU game. I actually think that could be one of the more intriguing games of the weekend with Nick Saban at LSU. Dan, you are in Disney, as we have talked about. Which coach do you think would be the most fun to take to Disney World and ride some rides with?
Well, I listened to him a lot, and I kind of go back to Dan Mullen. He is a character. I enjoy Dan Mullen. I think he's a great soundbite, and he seems like he's having fun himself. I've heard he's on an island somewhere in the Bahamas, so I think he'd be a character.
Yeah, is he?
Yeah, that's what I've heard. I heard he kind of flew the coop a little bit.
I thought he's on ABC.
Well, but he comes back. I think he's in and out. But they always joke when he's on the radio show I listen to that he's down in the Bahamas somewhere. So he must be living the life, because he was given several million to go away as well.
The best job in the country, getting paid not to coach.
The other guy I think would just be, maybe for a day, I don't know if I could do it more than a day, would be Mike Leach. Just because you would hear everything about medieval history, you would hear about everything other than football.
But I also think he would really break down each ride. You go to the Tower of Terror, and you get up there. The fun thing about the Tower of Terror is, the elevators said, I was on an elevator once, and, I mean, you could just hear it. Right?
I would pay my son $10,000 to not ride elevators, but, he won't do that. I could just hear it.
Kirk Ferentz would be fun to take to Disney World?
Absolutely not. I think he'd be a total buzzkill.
How about we all
How
go
about
to
you?
Disney?
Who would you hang out with?
Well, who I want to hang out with. I do think James Franklin would be a heck of a lot of fun at Disney World.
I think
too. He's a player's coach. Who I want to take to Disney World? Topper.
Ah.
I want to get him loose. I want to go to Disney World with the Phillies when they win the World Series Thursday night.
Let's do it.
Let's
make it happen.
We're going to fly down and meet you there. How about that?
I would love that. And can we, by the time this next week, could we do Weather Wagers live from the Phillies parade?
Send us, please.
Please do.
We don't want to count our chickens. There's a long way to go.
There's a long way to go.
We have certainly seen our Phillies blow it and botch it. But this team is just playing lights out. But
I like that Topper answer for sure. I think once he's out of the way of the cameras, he's a different guy. Apparently he's very sarcastic.
I just think he's just, again, the right pick. And that's easy to say when you're winning games, but there's a reason that they're winning games, because the guy's likable and he brings the clubhouse together, and that is how you manage. That is how you lead. You have to be likable. You have to bring people together.
Indeed.
And you have to create a good culture. And boy, has he done that. Dan, this is fun. I want to let you
get back
to Disney and enjoy your week down there. We certainly miss you. You're going to be back next week. This is going to be posted to YouTube. And when you get back next week, you got the mayonnaise coffee to try. We're holding you to that.
I will repay my debt, and then we'll be tied on side wagers.
I love it. We are looking forward to that. Enjoy your time down there. I'm going to call Kirk Ferentz and see if he'll ride Dumbo with you.
Tell him to leave Brian at home too. I don't want to see him.
Okay.
Or maybe
Sounds
we could
good.
talk defense because that's what their team seems to know a lot about.
Yeah, their offense is offensive. Let's put it that way. Dan, great to see you. Great linking up. That is Weather Wagers for this week. We will be back again next week. Enjoy your baseball, football, and your, in general, pleasant weekend. We wish you all the best. There's how you can contact us. Dan, why don't you have the last word this week from Disney World?
Yep, sure thing. If you want to reach out to us, you can find us on weatherwagers@gmail.com, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, meteorologist Brett Thackeray, meteorologist Dan Tomaso on Facebook, @Brett Thack, ABC27, Twitter and Instagram, @Doppler Dan on Twitter and Instagram. We love hearing from you. Brett, we'll see you next week, my friend.
Take care, everybody.